Thank you so much, Jen and Virginia. Greg and I are very pleased to be a part of this wonderful event and have been really enjoying the evening. A great excuse to get dressed up. I will give you a bit of a background about myself. I'm 50 years old and I've been a stay-at-home mom to our 3 kids for the last few years. We also have a dog, Shaq. We have a typical family full of lots of activities, and our dog loves his daily trail walks. I didn't have any risk factors, and it's not part of my family history. Symptoms of my stroke actually began in mid-January. I was experiencing some numbness in my right leg, numbness in my right arm, and at times numbness on the right side of my face. I knew what I wanted to say at times, but I was having trouble getting it out. It seemed like it was taking a little more effort to speak. I was advised by my doctor to go to the emergency room in order to get a quick referral to a neurologist. So I went to St. Paul's and I had a CT scan done and an ECG, but nothing showed up in the reports. I had a follow-up appointment with my neurologist on March 6th, and he diagnosed it as symptoms from migraine headaches. And all of this made sense to me since I have suffered from migraine headaches since I was a teenager. Ironically, 2 days after my appointment with the neurologist, I started to experience different symptoms. I was out for lunch with a girlfriend when my leg buckled underneath me. Thankfully, I didn't fall, and my face started to twitch. My girlfriend happened to notice it, and she asked me if I was okay. The symptoms didn't last for more than a few seconds, and I was okay to continue having lunch with her, but I did come home and called the neurologist's office because he had told me that if I was experiencing any other symptoms, that I should call him to see him again. The very next day, Greg and I were hosting a dinner party, and I was experiencing symptoms of not being able to speak again. And so I mentioned this to Greg, but again, the symptoms only lasted 10 to 15 minutes. After that evening, I had a headache for about 5 days. This was all leading up to the main stroke I had on March 24th. And by this time, COVID-19 was in full swing. Our spring break had been canceled. Greg was working from home, and all 3 kids were home as well. At around 12:30 in the afternoon, Grace and Nico and I were working in the garden. Grace had gone inside to get some water, so it was just Nico and I, when I suddenly started to see stars and I collapsed. Nico reminded me afterwards that I tried to push myself up, but I couldn't. Grace came back outside and noticed that something was wrong and that I was lying on the ground. And Nico kept asking me if I was okay, but I couldn't speak.
So certainly in looking back, it is all a bit surreal. I was on a conference call with Peru and Grace came down. And I wouldn't say she was panicked. You could tell something was wrong just from her face. So, I kind of came upstairs still half listening to the call and half listening to Grace. And it wasn't until I opened the door and I saw Adrienne on the ground, and just the way she was sitting, I could tell that something was wrong. So, I dropped the phone and ran out. And, I think it was fortunate for me. I've had a bit of first aid training, but just her symptoms were so stark. She couldn't speak. Any of the questions I asked, she was responding with just kind of a nah, regardless of what the question was. I did some tests on her arm and she had no, kind of control of the right side of her body. And while she was conscious, her face was unresponsive. So, I've had exposure to the Heart and Stroke Fast campaign, and to me, it fit the symptoms. So, I yelled at the kids to bring my phone. We called 911. The operator led me through some additional tests for the stroke, and certainly, those came to the same conclusion in terms of what they had. And, we were lucky. They loaded her up quickly, got her to VGH, and, and she was admitted quite quickly. We've been asked about kind of fears for COVID, and did we have any? At the time we didn't. I think it was early on in the whole process. So the real attention was just getting her care. And it wasn't until I arrived at emergency that I saw things were different. There was security at the door. You weren't allowed into the ward. So, I sat in the emergency waiting room for a couple of hours until they'd admitted her. I certainly have confidence in the healthcare system. So I knew she was getting the care that she could.
Within 15 minutes of my collapsing, I was in the ambulance on my way to VGH. And within 5 minutes of arriving at VGH, I was whisked away for my first CT scan. And when I came out of the scan, a stroke nurse was awaiting for me in the emergency ward, where the neurologist came in to assess what was happening at that time. And it was clear that I was suffering from something. They weren't sure whether it was a stroke or not at that point, but they knew that they were going to admit me to the hospital. And within a few hours, I was upstairs in a ward, and then I was sent for my first of 2 MRIs. After the first MRI, it was confirmed that I had suffered a stroke, and it was confirmed that I had actually suffered minor strokes leading up to the actual stroke on March 24th. So all the symptoms that I had been experiencing up to that point, the little episodes, were actually minor strokes. The last I saw of my children was when I was loaded into the ambulance. The last I had seen of Greg was when I heard the nurse telling him that he wasn't allowed to be in the emergency area. Nobody was allowed to come in to visit in the hospital. It was certainly a different time, just with all the COVID-related things going on, but I was very grateful to the care that was given to me while I was staying at the hospital. And thank goodness for FaceTime and text, because that certainly allowed for me to stay in touch with my family and friends. So after 10 long days at the hospital, I was finally discharged to go home. When I left the hospital, the doctors still weren't sure exactly what the cause of the stroke was, but I had a CT scan scheduled for 3 weeks after my discharge. I wasn't allowed to drive for the next month until I had the follow-up with my neurologist. But I do want to say, the love and support that we received from our family and friends was very humbling for all of us. We're extremely grateful to the frontline workers, the doctors, the nurses, the hospital porters who told me they don't get recognized. All of this, the care that was given to me at VGH was absolutely outstanding. I think we're very fortunate to live in the city that we do and the province that we do. Canada itself, I know firsthand that we have very, very good stroke care in this city. After my last CT scan, it was determined that the cause of my stroke was from an arterial dissection of the carotid artery. So I'm extremely lucky that I do not have any long-term symptoms. And I hope that if anyone experiences any of these symptoms, to not hesitate calling 911 and getting themselves to emergency for the help. I didn't consider myself a stroke candidate by any means, so to have experienced this has certainly been a lesson for me and my whole family. We're so grateful to the Heart and Stroke Foundation and BC government for running the campaign that allows everybody to be so cognizant of all the symptoms of the stroke. And we hope that everybody watching tonight and everybody here, if you're able to, will donate to the Heart and Stroke, and enjoy the rest of your evening.